The luxury of the midnight blue silk gown suddenly felt like a straitjacket. I stared at my phone's screen, the text from my mother glowing like a radioactive warning. Julian. The name tasted like copper in my mouth. For years, Julian had been the only person outside of my home who seemed to care. He was the high school counselor who brought us extra groceries under the guise of school programs. He was the one who sat by my mother's hospital bed when I had to work double shifts, telling me stories about how he knew my father in the old days. I had trusted him with everything, our address, our medical records, my fears. And now, I realized I had been hand-delivering information to the very man who was helping the Millers keep us under their thumb. "Uncle Arthur, we have to go. Now!" I shouted, my voice cracking the heavy silence of the ballroom. I didn't wait for his permission. I kicked off the silver heels that cost $5,000 and ran across the marble floor in my bare feet. The elegance was gone. The desperate girl from the slums was back, fueled by a terror that no amount of sterling money could soothe. Arthur was already on his radio, his face a mask of calculated fury. "All units, intercept a black medical transport leaving St. Jude's Hospital. Target is Mary Sterling. Use lethal force if necessary to stop the vehicle, but the asset must remain unharmed." We raced through the hotel lobby, a blur of blue silk and charcoal wool. The guests who were still lingering scrambled out of our way, their faces filled with confusion. They saw the princess running like her life depended on it, and for the first time, they saw the raw, jagged edge of the sterling power. We dived into the back of a black SUV that was idling at the curb. The engine roared, and we tore away from the curb, tires screaming against the pavement. "Talk to me, Arthur," I demanded, clutching the leather seat as we drifted around a sharp corner. "Who is Julian? Why would he do this?" Arthur kept his eyes on a tablet showing a map of the city with a blinking red dot. "Julian Vane wasn't just a counselor, Maya. He was your father's head of security. He was the one who was supposed to be on duty the night the scaffolding collapsed. When your father died, Julian vanished. We thought he was dead. We didn't realize he had switched sides, taking a payout from the Millers to go undercover and keep you and your mother in a state of controlled poverty." "Controlled poverty?" I whispered, the horror sinking in. "You mean all those times we almost got evicted, all those lost scholarship papers?" That was him. "He was the gatekeeper," Arthur said grimly. "His job was to make sure you never became successful enough to look into your father's past. He kept you hungry so you'd be too busy surviving to ask questions. But tonight, when you stood up in that ballroom and the video went viral, his mission failed. Now he's cleaning up the evidence, and in his mind, your mother is the ultimate piece of evidence." I looked out the window. The city lights were a smear of neon. I felt sick. Every kind word Julian had ever spoken to me was a lie. Every loaf of bread he had brought us was a chain to keep us in our place. He hadn't been helping us survive. He had been making sure we stayed weak. "The dot is moving toward the docks," Arthur noted, his voice dropping an octave. "He's trying to get her onto a private freighter. If she leaves the harbor, we'll never find her." I grabbed Arthur's arm. "You have to let me talk to him. If he sees your men, he'll panic. He'll hurt her. But he thinks I'm still the scared little girl he can manipulate. Give me a phone. Now." Arthur hesitated, then handed me a specialized encrypted device. I dialed Julian's number, the number I had saved under Helpful Julian for 5 years. It rang 3 times before a calm, steady voice answered. "Maya, honey, I heard about the gala. I'm so glad you're safe. I'm with your mother now. We're moving to a more secure location." "Stop lying, Julian," I snapped, my voice trembling with a rage I didn't know I possessed. "I know who you are. I know what you did to my father. And I know that if you don't stop that van right now, the Sterling satellites will have a drone strike on your position in 60 seconds. My uncle doesn't care about collateral damage, but I do. Don't make me choose between my mother and your life." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the sound of a heavy engine and the faint, rhythmic beeping of my mother's portable heart monitor. When Julian spoke again, the kind counselor persona was gone. His voice was cold, professional, and terrifyingly empty. "You've grown up fast tonight, Maya. A little too fast. Thomas would have been proud, but Thomas is dead because he didn't know when to quit. You have the sterling blood, but you don't have the stomach for what comes next. If you want your mother to keep breathing, you will tell your uncle to call off his dogs and let us pass. I have a boat waiting. Once I'm in international waters, I'll send you the coordinates of where I leave her." "I'm not a child anymore, Julian," I said, looking at the tablet. We were closing the gap. We were only 2 miles away. "And I'm not a poor girl you can scare with a cold voice. I am a sterling, and you are a dead man walking. Look behind you." At that exact moment, Arthur signaled the driver. We swerved into the opposite lane, roaring past a line of shipping containers. Up ahead, I saw the black medical van. Julian must have looked in his rearview mirror because the van suddenly swerved, trying to ram a police cruiser that had joined the chase. "Maya, get down," Arthur yelled, throwing his body over mine as the sound of gunfire shattered the night. The van's back tires exploded under the precision fire of Arthur's snipers. The vehicle fishtailed, sliding sideways across the rain-slicked pavement of the pier before slamming into a stack of wooden pallets. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of hissing steam and the distant sirens. I pushed Arthur off me and scrambled out of the SUV before the guards could stop me. I ran toward the smoking wreck of the van, my blue dress torn and stained with grease. The back doors were jammed. I grabbed a piece of discarded metal and began hammering at the glass. "Mom, Mom, can you hear me?" Inside, through the cracked window, I saw Julian. He was slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down his forehead. But in the back, strapped to a gurney, my mother was staring at me, her eyes wide with terror but alive. Suddenly, Julian's hand shot up. He wasn't unconscious. He grabbed a flare gun from the dashboard and pointed it directly at the oxygen tanks hooked up to my mother's gurney. "Back away, Maya," he wheezed, his eyes wild. "One spark and this whole pier goes up. I might be going to hell, but I'm taking the sterling legacy with me." I froze. The guards behind me leveled their rifles, but no one dared to fire. One spark. That was all it would take. I looked at my mother, then at the man who had pretended to be our savior. "Julian," I said, stepping closer to the window, ignoring the guns pointed at my back. "You told me once that my father was a dreamer. You said he dreamed of a world where people were treated fairly. Well, I'm dreaming of a world where you pay for what you did, and I'm about to make that dream come true." I reached into my torn dress and pulled out the one thing Julian didn't know I had. It wasn't a gun. It was the master remote for the hotel's security system, which Arthur had given me. I pressed the emergency lockdown button. The pier's massive industrial fire suppression system, designed to put out chemical fires, triggered instantly. High-pressure foam and water blasted into the van through the broken windows, drenching Julian and the oxygen tanks in a fraction of a second. The flare gun clicked, but the mechanism was soaked and useless. The guards swarmed the van, dragging Julian out and throwing him onto the cold concrete. I tore the back doors open and collapsed onto the floor of the van, hugging my mother as she sobbed into my shoulder. "It's okay, Mom," I whispered. "It's over, we're safe." But as I looked over her shoulder, I saw Arthur standing over Julian. Arthur wasn't looking at the prisoner. He was looking at a document Julian had dropped, a flight manifest. "Maya," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "The boat wasn't going to international waters. It was going to a private island in the Caribbean, an island owned by a holding company." "Whose company?" I asked, wiping the foam from my face. Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, he looked truly afraid. "The company belongs to your mother's primary physician, the man who has been treating her for 5 years, the man who told us she was terminally ill." I looked at my mother, who looked healthier in the moonlight than she ever had in that dim apartment. I realized the final, most sickening truth of all. Was my mother ever even sick? Or was her illness just another lie to keep me enslaved to the people who murdered my father? The final confrontation is coming, and I'm not just looking for justice anymore. I'm looking for blood.